Hello, hello. Okay, I think we're ready. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Judy's webinar, How to Prep Your Kids and Yourself for an Emergency. I am so excited for this one. We have just incredible guests with so much insight to share. Really excited that we have Kenzie Dew with us today, who's a mother of four, lives in Utah, recently just survived a house fire, and just really interested to hear the story of how it happened. I think so many people out there are just increasingly worried around kind of domestic fire safety and fires in general. We also, of course, are joined with Soraya Sutherland, Judy's preparedness emergency expert. Also, and I'm so fascinated to pick Dr. Erin Foster's mind and get tons of insights around kind of the psychology around emergency preparedness and how some people prepare more than others and like what goes on in a kid's mind during an emergency and during trauma. So really excited to have all of you here, and I will pass the baton over to Kenzie, but feel free, other panelists, to chime in.
Hey, thank you, Simon. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's totally one of those things that me actually happening to me, it's one of those things that I never in a million lifetimes would ever have thought it would have happened to me. So when it does, you kind of wake up. So I think that's one of the things that I wish I was a little bit more prepared for. So a little bit about me is I live in a cute little farming rural town. It's called Urda, Utah. It's outside Salt Lake City. We live on an acre and we do have some farm animals. They're so fun. We have some goats and chickens and alpaca. We have an alpaca named Pete. And I've got 4 kids. We built this dream home 3 years ago. It was everything we wanted, and all of a sudden we just had this tragedy happen out of nowhere. What happened is it ended up being an accidental electrical fire. So it wasn't anything anyone could have prevented. They couldn't figure out if it was the electrical box on the 3rd car garage or if it was an electrical plug. They never could determine it. But it was something completely unexpected. It was a Sunday night and it was 11:30 at night, and we were all sleeping because, believe it or not, school was starting the next day for like the first time for the year. It was like the night before the first day of school. And so I had all the kids in bed. We were all in bed. And I remember my husband waking me up like in panic. And he said, "There's a fire." And I kind of was just like, what are you talking about? You know, our fire alarms weren't going off. I couldn't see anything happening. I had no idea what he was talking about. And then he explained, he's like, I looked out the window, I heard a noise, there's a glow outside, like, get the kids. So I hopped up, and honestly, that is when panic hit me. I think panic hit him. We were completely in shock. His initial thought was, I don't know, it doesn't look too big, so maybe I can put it out myself. So I'm gonna go try and do that. You get the kids. So I went over to the garage man door, that like the door from our house that goes into our garage. And I wanted to see what he was talking about. And I opened the door, and that's when all the smoke from the garage came in our house. And that immediately, I just remember my throat burning, and I remember immediately the alarm above me, the fire alarm that was above me, went off. And so all of the alarms started going off. It was so loud. I ran down the hall because I didn't want my kids to wake up to the fire alarm. I was hoping that I could get there and, you know, wake them up just to help. I didn't want them to be completely in panic, but I woke them up, and my 11-year-old was sharing a room with my 2-year-old. And so I said, "Get your brother and get outside. There's a fire. I don't have time to explain it right now. Just get outside." And then I went down the hall, And I told my girls, I woke them up and I said the same thing. And now this is where I look back and I know I made a few mistakes. I was in sheer panic. I just remember shaking so bad. And I remember just telling myself it's 911, like push 911, because I was literally just shaking. So I'm trying to get the kids out of the house and call 911 at the same time. And when you're in that sheer like panic stress mode, I just couldn't even function. I remember being on the phone with the operator, explaining to her there's a fire at my house, trying to remember my address. I was completely in shock, like couldn't even tell her the address for like a couple seconds. Meanwhile, I'm getting my kids outside at the same time. There's two things that I look back on. And one of them is my kids on the front lawn were all, once we got on the front lawn, they could see the fire because it was big. It was on the outside of the house. And they were crying, obviously. They were completely in shock, like terrified. And I was focused on the operator on the phone with me on 911 trying to get the fire department over instead of focusing on consoling them. And that still bothers me. They were okay. It was quick. I was able to kind of do both, but I wish I would have done a better job. Another thing too is I was so busy focusing on calling 911 and just assuming that everyone was out. And this seriously terrifies me to this day. I wrote it in my blog post, but when we got out, there was probably 30 seconds that I didn't realize that I was missing my 4-year-old. And my 11-year-old actually brought it to my attention. Where's Monroe? Where is she? And right then she came running out the front door. So I had realized that I had walked out the door and shut the front door without making sure everyone was out because it's just that sheer panic mode. And she actually still talks about that. And it breaks my heart because she'll say, do you remember when I ran to your room and it was dark? She keeps saying it was dark because the power was out because it was an electrical fire. So she remembers that it was dark and she couldn't find me and it smelled like smoke and she didn't know where we were. So she went through the front door. So it still breaks my heart that that even happened. Luckily, we all got out. At the end of the day, we were all safe. The fire department came and luckily we had amazing neighbors who took us in. They swooped us in. They brought us over to their yard. They took my kids away from the chaos. They went and put a movie on for them so they didn't have to be in watching their home burn down, basically, which I'm so thankful for that. It's just recapping the whole thing. There are things I wish that I had have mentally prepared myself for so I could have had better focus on handling this kind of emergency situation.
Scary.
Wow.
So Soraya can really speak to the preparedness of this, but the therapist in me and the mom in me wants to first address the regret, which I think is really important to highlight, that in the moment, you aren't yourself and you aren't your mom's self. And a huge component of moving past this trauma is learning to let go and forgive what you're looking back on right now in a rational state of mind. Let that go.
Right.
Which is what we're here to talk about. How do we prevent that from happening?
Yes.
Kenzie, you said something that just, it triggered, and we're going to talk about here on the next slide about teaching, having a plan, right? Teaching your kids what to do, having a plan on what you're going to do. Because your daughter ran to your bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
She went to look for you, right?
Yep.
So that's that's, as a parent, as a mother, it hits you in a place that you can't even describe. But I want to take some parts of your story and highlight how we can better prepare on how we can possibly respond to events, God forbid they do happen to us. It's interesting. The majority of Americans live in a disaster zone. And we really don't always realize that. Ironically, America's biggest disaster threat is actually a house fire and fires. And so new data that's come out has said a fire department responds to a house fire every 24 seconds. And actually a fire every 24 seconds, a house fire every 87 seconds. And there is a civilian related fire related death every 2 hours in the United States. And that's according to the National Fire Protection Agency. And the even more heartbreaking part of this is 50% or more of children ages 5 and younger die while sleeping. Yeah. And so speaking to like the whole smoke detector and how critical that is, you need to have a smoke detector in every room of your house. You need to have one at least on every floor of your house. And then teach your kids what those smoke detectors sound like so that they know when they hear that audible sound, what they need to do, right? It's not just let's listen to it and figure it out. And that's what we're finding is the technology exists, but the traditions aren't always there to back them up. So educating them on what are they supposed to do when they hear something like this, and actually trying to overcompensate for that initial denial phase or deliberation of what you're going to do. The second part to this is making sure that you have a plan. You spoke to this, right? When you saw the smoke, you opened the door. We're going to talk about doors and not how we shouldn't be opening them if they feel warm, how to check them. But having a plan on what to do, not just for you, but also your kids and teaching them what to do. If in these types of events, when you told your children, get your brother and get out of the house, practice that with your kids. Go through the motions so that you feel more confident in your response to these types of situations. Because you're right, you go into that fight or flight mode, right? Cortisol, and I'm sure Erin's going to talk about this, floods your brain, and your ability to do simple tasks like remember your phone, call 911, remember your phone number. What is your house address? We can't, those connections just don't get made. I love visual aids, especially because of this reason. If you can post near your front door, back door, your emergency exits, a quick visual aid of what you need to grab as you're running out that door, it can remind you, okay, I need to make sure I grab my go bag, my shoes. Shoes are a big one, you guys. I can't tell you how many people show up at shelters without shoes on. You don't realize you need your shoes. Making that visual list of just saying, okay, quick, I've got my emergency documents, I've got my go bag, I've got my kids, my pets. And especially if you have no time, just having that quick visual aid ready to go as you're coming out. Because the one thing I really want everyone to understand is that disasters are predictable. Survivability is not. And that is completely associated to our behaviors and our actions and how we perform in these circumstances. And so the better off we are, the more we prepare, the better off we will all be trying to recover from those types of events. The other thing we find is people gather supplies in disasters. They look around and they grab things. And we see this in house fires and people who've had to evacuate quickly out of their homes. They're grabbing things and they get out of their house and they're like, I grabbed a hat, I grabbed a book, nothing they actually needed. So having these things ready to go, pre-assembled, grabbing them is incredible, especially doing it on the front end. We say the 5 Ps, having the 5 Ps ready, items ready to leave with. We're talking about people, we're talking about pets, we're talking about pills and medications, photos, photos of your family, photos of your children, and important papers. So we say papers, the 5 Ps. If you have no time, you're getting yourself and your pets out of the house as fast as you can. If you have some time that you can grab 5 minutes, you've got medications in addition to the previous things that we talked about, glasses, phones, chargers. And then if you have more time, then you can actually start to think, okay, what you would need. But involve your family, especially your kids, and Erin will speak to this here in a few minutes about how old children can be to really be able to understand what they're doing, but have them part of the process. What would they want to take with them? What are their comfort items that they want to include in their emergency kits? I shared this with the team earlier, but understanding what your current needs are is so important as well. So we as parents often, we just plan everything for our kids, right? What do they need to be okay? What do you need to be okay, right? I know that if I'm going to survive a disaster, I'm going to need a bottle of wine. So I'm going to put a bottle of wine in my emergency kit. But that's a realistic component for me, right? Or whatever it may be for you. Add those to your emergency kits as you go through it. The other thing to teach your kids, and for you as adults, once you get out of the house, stay out. Do not go running back in looking for stuff. The majority of fire-related deaths are caused by smoke inhalation. So get out. Once you're out, you get out. So practice that. Teach your kids. My 7-year-old sleeps through smoke detectors. So we understand this. It happens often. And of course, they only go off right in the middle of the night. That's what happens. But again, he'll sleep through it. So part of that plan is my older daughter will get him and have a plan. Where are you going to go? Do they know what to do? That's half the challenge that you're going to face. Teaching your kids how to recognize an emergency. This goes back not just to house fires, but teaching them about situational awareness. Pointing out things that are dangerous in your community, pointing out things that are safe, pointing out the helpers, the people that are helping people, safe people to go to if they get lost, if they need help. It will not only teach them about situational awareness in the current present, but it also will teach them what then is out of place in an emergency or in a situation that's abnormal. If you involve your kids in this aspect, you're giving them a set of skills that not only is going to help them for an emergency, but also will help them just in life in general. Also, how many of us actually have fire extinguishers in the house?
Not me. I didn't.
Do you know? And it's not just also having them, knowing how to use them.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
Because if you don't, it takes some level of skill. As Simon, we've kind of played around with it to figure out how to use a fire extinguisher.
Yes, we have.
You don't want to be doing it the first time when you actually have a fire. But not just having one, but knowing how to use it. Also teaching your kids how to dial 911. It's so critical because if you're not home and your sitter is there and we're all on smartphones, nobody has landline phones anymore. Teach your kids how to unlock your phone if they don't have a password, how to unlock their sitter's phone. And then if you've got younger kids, a really good activity is to just get paper plates and put the numbers like a phone on a wall and teach your kids like how to do 911, right? Just practice it, 911. It's a really easy way to help kids just kind of get oriented because they're going to see that same number pattern on a cell phone. They teach these things in school for a reason, right? Our kids are very, we don't give them as much credit as I think that they deserve. They understand, they perceive things, and they come home and they teach us, right? Guess what we did today? We learned about drop, cover, and hold on for earthquakes. Also, informing your sitter or a nanny or grandparents on what is the procedure? Do they know what to do? I mean, the majority of us are not home with our kids all the time, right? There's somebody else with our children. And we remember to tell them everything about their schedules and everything about what they need, but we don't always go through, okay, well, we live here and this is what we need to know. I live near the ocean. So guess what? Tsunamis are a big deal for us. So I teach my kids, I talk to my sitter. You hear these noises, you feel the earth shake. This is what's going on. This is what you need to do. And it's not always the most comfortable conversation, but you want to know something? I want them to know about it now rather than when something happens and they don't know what to do. So talking to your kids about it in a very non-scary, safe way. Also teach your kids. This is one thing we see all the time. Kids get scared in fires. They hear those smoke detectors go off. They see firefighters and then they want to hide. And you need to teach your kids they cannot hide from firefighters. Okay. So one way to do this is taking them down to the local fire station and I get right now it's a little complicated with what's going on in our current state, but once they're able to take them down there, have them put on all their breathing apparatus, their mask, their gear, and have them, have kids see everything, touch it, understand that these aren't people to be scared of. Because that's one thing we don't want our kids to do. We want them to make sure people know where they are. You were talking about the door to the garage. You always should feel doors before you open them. The handle can be hot. You can use the back of your hand to feel if that's hot, if there's heat coming from it. Do not open the door. So that, again, fires are driven by oxygen. So keeping that door closed. Two things you can also teach your kids that are, I think, really important. Teach them how to crawl. If there is smoke in your house, crawling under the smoke. And then we've kind of moved away from this about stop, drop, and roll, right? Teach your kids, if in that worst case scenario, what to do. Stop, drop, roll. Like that is something that I don't hear talked about as with enough frequency, but teach them if they have to get out. We underestimate our ability to be able to see in a fire how black it will get and how dark it will get, and your visibility will be zero. So teaching them how to count doors to exits. Those are simple things that we can teach our kids to do. Crawling on the ground, trying to stay low underneath the smoke if they have to get out. But again, all of these things kind of go into that pre-disaster moment, right? How do we enable our kids to be empowered to respond? If they feel that they're part of that process and they have some tools to get through it, they will be more confident in being able to respond and face those scary situations. So I really want to hear Dr. Foster's input on kind of the psychology around some of this stuff, but these are all really good things to start doing with your kids and start asking those questions in the non-disaster periods of saying, hey, what do you think we should do? How do you think we should get out of the house if we can't go this way? And make it not scary, but make it in a way that they feel that they are part of that solving the problem process, so that they feel empowered to make those decisions. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Foster and I'll let you go.
Thank you, Soraya. I am really appreciative of your point about when we're talking about trauma, your point about take your kids to the fire station. I know the fire station is a big field trip, which isn't really happening right now. But when I have worked with children and families who have survived traumas, I hear this over and over, that the children are not conditioned to see what a firefighter looks like in a full turnout. So really, really important for children to understand the firefighters come to the school, they do the talks, they go to the station, they see them in the shiny blue uniform. They don't see them in full turnout. That's really important because they look scary and intimidating to children. I've heard this over and over. So I appreciate that point. I think one of the most important tenets to live by is stay alert, stay alive. What we don't remember to do in the midst of crisis is breathe, stop, breathe, center, get calm, go logical. When we're logical, we can stay alert. When we're alert, we can stay alive. We can kick in these incredibly important principles that Soraya just pointed out. Our brains go to 3 modes in the event of a crisis: fight, flight, or freeze. So understanding which one you are attuned to helps you hone in which plan to use. Being aware, practicing mentally. If I were in a tsunami, a fire, an earthquake, what would I feel like? Physically, what would my body feel like? What would I think about? Emotionally, how would I feel? Practicing these scenarios helps you hone in your survival plan. The other important thing to remember is, how do you communicate? Do you come from a place of panic or do you come from a place of calm? Children are incredibly resilient when we are calm because we are the adult. The adult is the safe place. So Children weather trauma, children weather a crisis when the adult is calm, when the adult is rational, and when the adult is a safe place to turn to. I can't emphasize this enough. Why, as the adult, it's important for you to really practice and rehearse what would it feel like for me in this moment, so that you can tune into your breath, which is going to kick in the left side of your brain that keeps you rational. When you're rational, kids stay rational. So when we experience trauma, when we experience crisis, the tendency is to either swing to chaos or to swing to rigidity. The chaos is flight, the rigidity is freeze. So what we want to do is stay present and attuned with logic so that we can be alert and we can be the safe, steady component for kids to look to. When we do that, kids also know how to react in a calm, rational way. And the research shows the kids aren't going to internalize trauma the way we as adults or parents might think they will. It could simply just be an event that happened, that they experienced. And what we want to do is identify what happened, what did you feel, what did you think, and what do you want to do with it? Kids have an amazing ability to do that. And it's okay to talk about these events as a family. It's okay to talk with the children about what it was they felt. What did they experience? They just need to give voice to it so that it's not overpowering or confusing. And what we don't often recognize in trauma with children is that they have this amazing ability to just pull it up, look at it, say, oh, that's what it was. That's the feeling. And then let it go and move through it. Really important. The other piece I want to touch on that you brought up early on in the conversation is your feelings of guilt, fear, remorse, haunting, I think is what I heard. You have to let that go. We can't change what happened. It happened, it's over. We have to look at the facts. The facts are, you are all safe. You are all alive. You all made it. Mom guilt will serve no role in moving through trauma and moving through a crisis. And if you hold that, the kids are going to know you're holding it. And then they'll instinctually feel it and they'll internalize and wonder if they also did something wrong in how they got through this. So while you're not, wrong for feeling it, of course, every mother would feel that way. But give yourself compassion. You are human. This is trauma. This was crisis. It didn't go wrong. So you have to let it go.
Right.
The reason for this is we don't want the children to assume that something like this is going to always happen. The better you move through it, the better they're going to move through it. Right. So helping them understand that this isn't something that should have happened, but it did. But it's okay because you did it as a family and everybody is still there.
Right.
Really understanding that if you practice mentally and emotionally what this could feel like, if it does, everyone's going to weather it much faster. The key to processing, the key to resilience is how well do you cope? Mm-hmm. Children have this amazing ability to cope if we show them that we are also coping because you're safe, because it's contained. Children are looking for a contained place to identify and express what it is they're feeling. So the faster you can forgive yourself and let it go, the more containment you're then creating, which creates an environment where it's safe for the kids to say, that was scary, but it's okay.
Right.
We're rebuilding.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm curious about what it is you feel like you need in order to move through this. And how can you share that with other parents who may have experienced the same thing?
Do you mean kind of like move through the guilt maybe on the mistakes that I made?
Yes, because what I'm hearing is that is the worst part for you versus the actual experience of the crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And I mean, luckily my kids are amazing and they don't see that. But I would say exactly what we're talking about tonight is just, if I could tell everyone, just if you haven't had something happen yet, obviously take this whole conversation, be prepared mentally. That was my big mistake, I think. But if people have already gone through something and they have, kind of mom feelings, I think what you said is perfect. And I think what we are doing is we're just taking every day as a blessing, like we're all safe. And honestly, what's getting us through is building our new home. Just looking forward to what we're going to, this beautiful home that we're going to be able to share for in the future, and we're all safe. That's what's important. That's all that's important.
Part of resilience and part of growth are what we call love maps, and love maps are shared experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So you're attuning to each other as a family by growing this love map of rebuilding and surviving this together. Don't underestimate how powerful a bond that is and how that's going to get passed down through the generations.
That's amazing, because I feel it. We all feel it. We have never been closer as a family. Never.
Shared experiences, whether they're traumatic or not, are what bond us as in a relationship, as friends, as family, in a marriage. It doesn't matter. So what matters is you have decided collectively as a family that this is not going to be an event that creates chaos. This is going to be an event that creates growth.
Absolutely.
Dr. Foster, I wanted to ask you, what I've heard that it's helpful for children to express their feelings and emotions to trauma and to disasters by drawing pictures if they can't find the words. Is that something that you've seen or that you would recommend for parents to have kind of in their toolkit to help their children cope?
Great question. Yes. So sometimes kids don't have the words, and some kids don't even know what the feeling is. So giving them a safe, again, back to this idea of containment, in a way that feels safe, that they understand. So expression through drawing is phenomenal. Sometimes playing, sometimes allowing them to work to recreate what it was they felt through play can be very effective in kids letting it go psychologically, because what happens is the child is able to identify and process in a way that feels manageable for them. Sometimes words don't feel manageable for children. So offering them outlets, what I always say in trauma or crisis is constructive versus destructive. So if you know that a constructive outlet for your child is drawing, give them that. If you know it's play acting, give them that. Sometimes it's music, allowing them to, maybe they play an instrument, allow them to express through music what it was they felt. But the important part here is children being able to access what they feel and express it in a way that makes sense to them.
That's great. The other thing that I think we've touched on briefly is has to do with how we don't always give our kids enough information because we're afraid that they can't handle all the stuff that we want them to know, right? We're afraid that we're going to create this level of fear in them if we tell them about all these different things that can possibly happen. I'd like to get kind of your take on that side of it. I do want to share with you a story about the Sumatra tsunami that happened. And we talked about, I briefly mentioned how, making sure your kids are aware of what a smoke detector sounds like, because we want them to know what to do, right? When the siren goes off at the beach, we want them to know what to do, right? Because just having that happen is not enough. So this is very similar to what happened in Sumatra after the earthquake. People flocked to the beach to see what was going on, right? The traditions didn't follow. The technology was there about what to do, but nobody was educating them on what they were actually supposed to be doing, right? These things were happening. So there was actually a 10-year-old girl that was visiting with her parents, and they were on the beach. And 2 weeks prior, she had learned about tsunamis in her class. And after the earthquake, she recognized the things that she had learned in class and saw those events happening in the water. And she told her parents, and her parents started telling everyone on the beach to get off that beach. And they all started to move and get off the beach. And then they went to the hotel and they told them, and they started evacuating the hotel and that beach. And that beach was one of the only beaches where they did not have a single death or major injuries. And it was attributed to the fact that all of us adults who think we have all the skill sets to deal with everything didn't have that level of skill set, right? They're swarming to the beaches to see what's going on. They're watching the water recede. And yet it took a 10-year-old girl who had the tools, the basic information, and she saved all those people's lives that day because she told them, this is what's going on. And so, I think that that's something that we as parents kind of shy away from in talking about because we don't want to scare them. So what are your thoughts around kind of how we give things to our children in terms of information in manageable bite-sized portions to help them kind of come to terms around the disaster, that concept, but then also to be able to process and create and develop those tools to face those situations?
Excellent question. So again, back to, we are the safe adult. Children are looking to us to provide them with calm, consistent, contained information. So if we explain to our children what could happen and how it could happen in a way that is, and what the plan is in order to keep them safe, it takes the power of fear out of the situation. Again, stay alert, stay alive, situational awareness. If we explain to them in a way that is calm and consistent and not emotionally charged, what we're doing is we're setting the pattern for them that if this happens, this is the manner in which you go about dealing with it. And therefore, we're not imprinting trauma, or the crisis isn't imprinting trauma, because we go back to training. This is why firefighters train. This is why the military trains. This is why all first responders train. They rely on training in the midst of trauma. Same with our children. If we train them and we provide the information in a way that is consistent and not emotional, it therefore doesn't have any impact or meaning when it happens. It's just something that they move through. There might be some initial emotional reaction, but as long as it's processed again in a constructive way, it doesn't have to have lasting permanent damage.
Kenzie, I want to ask you.
And we also, I think it's important to remember that we might make something scary to a child that isn't scary. And it's not up to us to decide for our children what's scary.
Right.
Kenzie, from your experience, have you guys gone through, I know you're kind of in the midst of the remodel and moving around. Have you had those conversations about what to do now, what the plan is if something should happen?
It's funny you say that, but not really. And I think it's because of what Dr. Foster just said is I don't want to scare them that it's going to happen again. I need to. That's going to be on my to-do list. I was also actually, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Foster, if my concern moving forward that I've had is my kids are pretty resilient. They've been doing great. They're looking forward to the build and their new rooms. That's kind of exciting for them. But I'm worried about once we get back in the home again, because it's a similar floor plan. We're not changing it up too much. I'm worried those first couple nights, I'm scared they might have flashbacks or have some sort of concern of that night coming back to them, of that, terrified feeling. I guess what can I do to help them in case that happens?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked it. It is perfectly okay to bring that up with your kids and say, hey, this is something mommy's thinking about. Is it something you're thinking about? And again, normalizing, taking the power out of the level of intensity by saying it's okay if you feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do, mommy and daddy are going to be there. We are going to keep you safe. And then you provide them with an outlet where they can express it. When we experience trauma, we want to be very careful to not re-trigger trauma with too much stimulation. But what I think we don't often talk about is that children may not interpret it the same way we do. Like, we might be concerned as the parent that this is going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
but it might not be in the forefront of their consciousness.
Okay.
But it's also okay to say, hey, if you have concerns, if you have fears, that's okay. Tell me more.
Okay.
Tell me what's happening.
Right.
By giving voice to the emotion, you take the power out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Also explaining to kids that feelings might be big, feelings might be scary, but feelings are also like a wave. They're going to pass through.
Okay, that's great.
And acknowledging that it might come up and it might feel too big and it might feel intense, but then it's going to go away. The way it goes away in a healthy way is if we just address it. And I think one of the things where a lot of parents are afraid is to actually teach their children to lean into the fear, lean into the pain, lean into the discomfort. That's how you move through it. And that's how you take any of the power out of it. Okay. And then again, we're talking about planning. Talk ahead of time about if you have a scary dream or if you have a scary feeling when we move back to the new house, what do we want to do with that? Maybe you come up with a little family ritual. Children are very in tune to ritual. So maybe you even, and this would be almost a little bit of systematic desensitization, but you prep them. Maybe you guys have a special candle and you light a fire and you put the fear into the fire and allow them to blow it out. That would be okay. That's another way of teaching children how to take control and power over how they feel, while also taking out the fear of the fire, right. Taking that out of it in a contained, again, we always go back to a contained, safe way of approaching something. So coming up with creative ways, or maybe getting mason jars and you practice, say, well, what are the things you might be afraid of moving back to the new house? And let them write it down or let them draw it and then have them put it inside the mason jar and close the jar and say, okay, we're going to put it over here and we're not going to worry about it. So knowing you know your children better than anybody ever will. You know your children better than any therapist ever will. Coming up with ways in which your children can express potential fear or immediate fear in constructive, creative, expressive ways is going to take the power out of it.
Okay. That's great. Thank you.
The other thing that we do often related to planning is, and this, Dr. Foster, you got me thinking about it, was we have family meetings, bringing everybody together and talking about something. And if it's like, maybe it's some stuffed animal, whoever's holding that stuffed animal is the one that's allowed to talk and share at the time. But having those family meetings, and, you know, we go back to planning, having, you know, talking about the things we think are scary can be scary, but they're teaching in our schools, right? When our kids were actually at school, but they were doing the drop, cover, hold on, right, for earthquakes. Now that the majority of us, regardless of where we live, are prone to some type of earth movement, right? Re-emphasizing that, you know, talking about those things. Okay, why? And this is the big thing that we miss every time when we talk about preparedness. We tell people what to do, but we don't tell them why we want them to do it. If we can explain why we tell people to drop, cover, and hold, now they understand the reason we want them to do it. Teaching our kids, okay, walking through your house, where are some areas that we can do drop, cover, hold? And why do we do that? Because we know it can save our life, right? We know that things can fall on us. Earthquakes don't kill people, okay? It's the fires, it's the stuff that falls on people. That is what ends up being the issue. And so explaining the why do we tell our kids to stay in bed? This is key. So Kenzie, you were talking about, you know, your kids and your daughter ran to your room to look for you. You know, having, especially earthquakes, things like this, what are your kids supposed to do? What is their plan? Have we talked about, in a fire, do not come looking for mommy. You either get out if you can, or and I will come to you, or stay where you are and I will come to you, whatever that plan looks like. But then also talk about, you know, how they can feel safer, right? So if I'm teaching kids like how to get out of two ways out of every room in your house. So the door, obviously your pathway is the option one, but if not, it's a window. So what is the second option? Give them those tools, give them the things that will help them feel empowered. For us as parents, you know, it's ironic because we teach this, right? And I tell people, don't run in an earthquake, because if you're not on the ground, the earthquake will throw you there. But there's nothing in the whole world that's going to prevent me from trying to get to my kids, period. And I know this about myself. As Dr. Foster was telling you, it's the fight, flight, or freeze. I am a flighter. I know this because we had an earthquake before we had children. And my initial reaction was to get out of my house and leave my husband behind. So, but again, if we can, like Dr. Foster was saying, is think through the processes, think through how we're going to react in those situations. I can now train myself not to react that way, right? So now I know, okay, I know what I want to do and I know what I'm supposed to do. But again, it's removing those hazards from my ingress and my access route to my kids. So knowing that I'm going to run to my children, right? And they are to stay where they are. I remove picture frames from the way, or I make sure everything is bolted to the wall. And I've got earthquake putty behind anything that could potentially fall on me, because I know it's going to be it's going to be horrible trying to get down the stairs to get to my kids' room. But again, it's having that plan, having that family meeting, having these conversations that are not scary, soliciting the questions that ask your children to be part of that conversation, and then giving them tools related to preparedness, having them make their own go bag. Okay, so what are they going to take with them, and why is that important to them? You know, us as parents also thinking about just items, right, that we gather stuff. It's just the psychology, and Erin, Dr. Foster can talk about this, of why we grab what we grab. Really interesting. And during 9/11, of the individuals that were surveyed, 40% of people went to get stuff because they felt that they needed to take it with them, because in times of uncertainty, they wanted everything that they needed to take with them to be prepared. And they milled around and they wasted precious time. But if you have an idea of what you want to take, and we talked about this, What do you need to take if you have to get out of your house fast? What do you need? Important documents. Have you ever tried to get your birth certificate or vaccine records or a social security card? Not having to deal with that post disaster can be critical. And I'm sure Kenzie, you know, looking at your house, and it's horrifying to see what happened. Insurance coverage, right? Were you able to document everything correctly? You know, did you have photographs of each room in your house? How was that process for you? Were you able to recover some of these important documents?
Yeah, that would be a huge tip, honestly. On top of everything you said, is if, you know, heaven forbid your house does catch fire like mine. Luckily, I'm a blogger, and so I had all my home decor on my Instagram. I had every nook and cranny of my home photographed. But honestly, that's probably another big tip I've been giving people is just one day when you cleaned your house, go through and take pictures of every little corner, every room, just so you have it documented, because that's been a huge lifesaver with our insurance claim. Absolutely.
Kenzie, I have people DMing me right now who are tuning into this, who are really interested in hearing kind of about the aftermath and where you are now. You said, I think you mentioned to us kind of on the pre-show that you're in a trailer right now, close to your home. What's the kind of road to recovery in terms of how long it's going to take to get you back into your new home?
We're hoping by fall we'll be able to move in. I told everybody I really don't want to do another Christmas in this trailer.
I bet.
Yeah, so we kind of have a different situation where we live, and because we're on an acre and we have a farm here, it was just a lot more convenient to get a trailer and live in it. Also, another reason I wanted to do it is because my kids were completely pulled from their entire normal of their safe space of their home. And the last thing I really wanted to do was pull them out of this town and place them somewhere else where they didn't know anybody, and like in a rental home. So that was the normalcy I could keep for them, was keeping them home, keeping them with their animals, keeping them with the neighbors that are best friends, just that sense of home. So yeah. Yes, we are living in a camp trailer right now.
I love it.
All 6 of us, we're really close. We were talking about that earlier. We're really close. Yeah, we're surviving. We're blessed, we're safe, and we get to watch out this window of our new build every day. So I can't.
That's amazing. And I have one more question coming in my DMs about your kids and whether they had any sort of nightmares after the fact. Did they have any kind of wake ups in the middle of the night in fear?
So the first 4 nights after the fire, we all slept in the same bed because they were scared. They were still, it was the unknown of what their future was going to hold, just all the emotions. And so it felt right, and they wanted to, and we were fine with it. As far as I know, they haven't told me about any nightmares.
Okay, good.
I think they're doing okay. We're really close as a family. This has brought us close, and usually they've been pretty good about talking to me about what's going on, and I usually pull them aside too, like especially my 11-year-old, because they don't always like to share, right?
Share.
So, yeah, and so I pull him aside and I'm like, how you doing? Like, how you really doing?
How you really doing?
Right. Not just the fire, but I also understand, we live in a trailer with your 3 siblings. Like, are you okay?
Right. You're close to them.
Right. Yeah. Yes. But yeah, no, we're doing really good. And I think that's the one thing that's kept us together, is just us being together, us just having a strong family and talking about it. And yeah, we're
well,
okay.
Kenzie, thank you so much for sharing your story. It was just incredible in your resilience. Soraya, Dr. Foster, this has been so incredible. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to have more of these.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
This was really good. And for those of you who are listening, we're going to put together a recap of tips and tricks from Dr. Foster, from Soraya, and also tons of insights from Kenzie too. So we'll put that together and share it with the group.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a
Yeah.
wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.